Welcome back to K26 and Beyond, show where I take a blaster and modify it from its simplest, easiest, and cheapest options all the way up to fairly top tier, much more expensive options. And this episode, you guys chose the Modulus ECS 10, which kind of surprised me, honestly. But it's a good blaster from what I've heard, and I've never actually modded one. I've owned one for a while. I think I got it at Goodwill. And I've been meaning to, because there are some things I really like about it. And some of the ergonomics I'm a big fan of. So this is going to be fun. I will eventually mod this all the way up into my colors and do something fun with it, no doubt. But we're going to go through a number of different options here, starting with the simplest and cheapest options that are very much not recommended, and I cannot stress that enough. But I am going to cover them in the hopes that I can make it at least a little bit safer for those of you that are going to do it anyway. And I know that there is no way for me to convince you to never do it, because it is simply so much cheaper. That is the draw to using higher voltage batteries. This runs on 4 AA batteries, and on 4 AA batteries, it will get around 60 FPS, is what I was getting out of it with stock Elite darts. Now, what darts you use can have an effect on your FPS, and I did all my tests with stock darts, not so that you would know what the FPS is going to be, but so that you can see the difference between one setup and the next. So, while different darts will give you different FPS than what you will see here, hypothetically, you should get the same performance increases proportionally with whatever darts you are using. So 60 with the stock darts. Now, the simplest and the cheapest, and like I said, not recommended, is to simply use 2 dummy batteries, AA dummy batteries. They are just basically a wire that goes from one end to the other. You can get them from Out of Darts for $4 for 4 of them. So, you know, they're very, very cheap. And then a pair of Kuluk batteries, which I believe are $6 a piece, or $6 a pair from Out of Darts. So you're looking at $10 for this, and it will give you a slight performance increase. Not a lot. You're looking at maybe 80s for FPS, which is, yes, a 33% increase. The problem is you only have 2 batteries in here. And the reason that that's a problem, and I'm hoping, I know I'm never going to be able to deter you from using these based purely on the fact that they're potentially dangerous if you use them incorrectly. Which means the spin-up time is going to be slower, and the spin-up time between shots is where you really see the sag. Yes, the first shot will hit 80 FPS, but if you quickly draw the trigger, every shot will be 5 FPS less, if not worse. So if you're trying to dump an entire magazine into a zombie horde, by the 6th or 7th shot, you're getting 40 FPS if you're lucky. At which point, you know, you might as well be throwing the darts at them. If you up it to 3 Kuluk, adding another $6 because they come in pairs to your cost, you can actually potentially get up to 100 FPS with just that, which is the other reason that we're never going to be able to get rid of these, because for $14 you can get your Modulus up to 100 FPS. It's not that much better. You can get up to 100 FPS, yes, but again, you still don't have the capacity. You're still one battery short, and these inherently don't have as much current as AA batteries, or especially as Lipos have. And so again, you're going to lose FPS between every shot if you don't give it lots and lots of time to rev up between shots. And you're still not going to have as much of a battery life. And on 3 even Kuluk batteries, which are a slightly lower voltage, you can smell the motor burning. There is that very distinct electronic burning smell when you rev with this many, and it will eventually destroy the motors or the switches or the wiring or something. So yeah, if you absolutely need to get to 100 FPS with no other modifications and you don't care that it's going to destroy your blaster, yeah, that'll work. It's just not a good idea, and it's particularly a bad habit to get into using these if you plan to go up to the higher motors, because on stock motors it's not so much of a problem because stock motors don't draw as much, and so you're less likely to damage the batteries. But if you continue to use these when you switch up to, you know, high current, high voltage motors, then you are far more likely to end up damaging your batteries, which can have a catastrophic failure either in the blaster or when you go to recharge them. And that's the real risk, is if you damage these cells by overdrawing them or over draining them, when you go to recharge them, they can fail catastrophically, which can either vent poisonous chemicals or potentially start a chemical fire. And if it's on your charger plugged into your wall, that can burn your house down. So it's bad. They're really, really not advised. But if you're gonna use them, because I can't convince you not to, because they are so cheap and do have the performance, be very careful not to drain them too far. You really should consider putting in a voltmeter at the very least. It's a super simple thing to install. And if you make sure that you don't let the voltage drop too low, at the very least you're less likely to damage the batteries and thus have a catastrophic failure. The next option up will give you a little bit more power are the IMRs, which are 3.7 volts, so again, a little more power. They're also more expensive. These ones are also sold by Out of Darts. They're Nicor. They're 650 milliamp, and they are, I believe, $12.50 a pair. So $12.50 a pair. We'll get you two, and you know, two of them, and again, two of the dummies, which is $4. So now you're looking at $16.50 plus shipping. For this, and this will give you roughly 85 FPS, maybe even up to, you know, a little bit higher. But same issues with the Cool Look in that if you overdrain them, or they end up getting damaged, they can be very potentially dangerous, and so they're simply not recommended. They also have the same current issues. They don't have any better current than the Cool Look, and they definitely don't have as good as Lipo or even Alkalines. Going on to 3, now you're definitely going to burn them up. Yeah, you're hitting 105 on your first shot, but every shot after that you lose 5 FPS. And you're going to burn out something. But they're just so cheap. People are going to continue to do them. So be careful. Add a voltmeter, or if the performance starts to sag, swap your batteries. It's not worth risking damaging your cell and then trying to recharge them and having a serious issue. So avoid them if possible, but I know people aren't going to because they're just so darn cheap. But let's move on to what I do recommend, which is replacing internals and going to better batteries. Now, one pair of motors I wish I had. I don't have any on hand because I didn't think this one was going to win, so I didn't order those motors, which are Honey Badgers, which are a 2S motor, but are a low enough current requirement that you can actually run them on AA's. 2S Lipo is roughly 7.4 volts, and 4 AA's is going to only give you 6. But the Honey Badgers will run on that, and it will improve the performance. I've done a number of ones for little kids who wanted to do, you know, a very simple upgrade. So we did a very simple rewire and upgraded to Honey Badgers, but kept everything else the same. And there was a very noticeable increase, not to the point of being dangerous for small children, but it was noticeable. And I wish I had, you know, had either chronographed those or that I had a pair that I could install so I could show you what the performance increase is just installing Honey Badgers on stock cage, stock motors, and stock wiring. But unfortunately I don't. But know that that is a possibility, and Honey Badgers are relatively cheap. They're $5 a piece. So it would cost you $10 to upgrade them, and then using just your regular AA's or, you know, rechargeable AA's if you want to use the nickel metal hydrides would actually give you a boost enough to be, I think, worth that much money, and definitely a better option than going to IMRs or IFRs for probably roughly the same performance increase and roughly the same cost. You do have to know how to solder, which is, you know, one of those skill sets that not everybody has and is really a limiting factor when you start getting into Nerf. Is once you want to get into upgrading your flywheels, you have to know how to solder. It's not terribly difficult once you know how to do it. There are lots of tutorials on the internet. That's how I learned, and I've done some tutorials, and I should probably do more. All right, let's take a look at what we have in here. As I said, it is essentially a Strife. You've got your rev trigger that also has the lock, the mechanical trigger lock, and then there are several other locks. Magazine lock that is also a mechanical trigger lock, and also an electronic lock. Or electric lock. It keeps the flywheels from spinning if you don't have a magazine. It also prevents you from being able to even pull the trigger, physically be able to pull the trigger without a magazine. So lots of redundant locks, and a lot of those in a flywheel blaster don't make a whole lot of sense. Other than saving battery life by not revving when there's nothing in there. It's not like a Springer where it's likely to do damage if you pull the trigger on an empty flywheel, because it's going to be fine. Having something that prevents you from pushing if you're not revving is useful, because if you're not revving when you pull the trigger, you can push a dart into flywheels that aren't going, and then when you go to spin them up, you know, it stalls your motors, and that's bad. But most of the time we end up having to take that mechanical lock out in order to be able to fit the switch in here, and particularly in this one, because the design of the handle is such that there is not as much room back here as there is in a Strife, which is one of the detriments. Luckily, we do have smaller switches. We don't have to use a full Omron switch. I've got smaller high amp switches. But let's take a look at the wiring. So it starts up here in the battery, obviously, and there is a thermistor, which is one of the first things you will need to remove. And if you upgrade to Honey Badgers, you will absolutely need to remove this thermistor, or it will shut the system down when you try to draw more current than it's expecting, which the Honey Badgers will do. But that is simply a matter of splicing the wire that's connected to this thermistor directly to your positive lead instead of where it's currently going. Now, let's see what else we've got wired into this thing. There is another bit of green board back here that I'm not entirely sure what it does. It looks like it's just all supposed to be, you know, a convenient mounting for the internals. That may be something you would want to rewire if you were upgrading even just as light as Honey Badgers, for the same reason. There may be something on that board that won't play nice with that amount of current. Now, obviously, there's also a great deal of green board here that has thermistors and resistors and diodes and Lord knows what else, all of which can just go. We're not going to use any of that in any modification that we do. I mean, those motors and that board are just going to get scrapped entirely. No harm, no foul. But the negative is going directly to them. That's the black wire. The black wire also is going to be coming up to our jam door lock switch. And what this switch is designed to do is to halt the motors if you open the jam door. It prevents the motors from spinning, prevents you from revving if the jam door is open, and if you open the door while the motors are spinning, it sends negative through to the positive side of the motors and will halt them. That's where the motor braking comes from. Now, for the most part, I don't leave that in. I understand the reason for it. They don't want small children sticking their finger in there trying to clear a jam while the blaster's revving, and that would be bad. But I'm an adult, and I will stick my finger in the flywheel if I feel like it. But the real reason that we generally remove them is the less complicated, the better. Fewer things to fail, one less switch to go bad, one less solder joint to go bad, one less solder joint to have to do in the first place. But if you really like motor braking, that's one place where you can implement it. The other place you can actually implement it is on the rev switch, so that when you let go of the rev switch, it sends positive through to the other side of the motors and will halt them. Some people like that because it cuts down on noise. The downside is it is harder on your motor and will drain your batteries. The other switch we have in here is our mag lock, which we are again going to take out because the motors and batteries that we're going to be putting through here are not going to play nice with these smaller switches. So there is the wiring. All comes out in a nice neat bit. And yeah, it looks like this board is just here to be a center point for all of the wires to go through so that they're a little bit easier to probably to manufacture, though they didn't do that in later blasters that I know of, so not sure why they did it in this one. But the only thing out of all of this that we really need is the battery tray, though we actually probably might leave that out as well because we'll have more room for a lipo if we don't. Now there is some space that can be made by taking apart the battery door. That part can come out, and that'll give you a little more space. There are also 3D printed extended battery trays. I really like the location of the battery door on this. It definitely has potential to be able to hold a massive lipo if you were to Dremel out all of this and stick something up into this front section, which would be nice if you then had it closed with something else rather than this pin. If you Dremeled that out and used magnets or a rail lock or something, you could fit a massive lipo in this blaster, and that would be kind of handy. It would make it front heavy, but it is also more symmetrical, and I like that because I'm a fan of symmetry. The back end, like I said, is similar to a Strife, but not similar enough to allow you to simply easily drop in the various full auto kits. It's not impossible to get a Strife full auto kit into this with enough dremeling, but it doesn't simply drop in. I may look into that just because I would love to have this be a full auto blaster, just because I like that it's bigger. Some people would argue that that's a downside. I have Strifes, I have my small auto Strifes. I would like something a little bit beefier, and this one is nice and beefy. So we'll see what I end up doing this in the long run. All right. Cages. Now I have two different cages here. Lovely. These are both OFP cages, though one of them, this one is a 43 millimeter, and this one is the 41.5 millimeter. So it's higher crush, and the higher crush generally allows you to impart more energy on the dart and will make them go faster, but it requires a higher torque motor. So for the lower torque, we're going to go with one of the inexpensive options, the Michel 2. Now, Michel 2 motors were designed by Foam Blast and were specifically engineered for Nerf applications. They're a 2S motor. They spin at the RPM that we need. They're very robust, very well designed, and they're cheap. They're $3 a pair. Now, this is where we're going to start running into why it's so hard to get people to quit using IMRs and IFRs, and that is because the proper upgrades get expensive quickly. Now, Michel 2s, yeah, $3 a piece. And if you just threw them in, you would still need, even if you use the stock cage and the stock wheels, you would need to replace the wiring and you would need to replace the switches. And while that's not terribly expensive once you take into account the tools necessary, a soldering iron, and the skills necessary, it's definitely going to be more expensive than the IFRs or the IMRs. Once you start getting into cages and wheels, it gets much more expensive very quickly. The biggest leap really is getting your lipos in your Lipo Charger. A good Lipo Charger is going to cost you between $20 and $50 easily. You really kind of want to go with the more expensive one because it has more safety features, which are important. Being able to discharge and having better detection on the safety and the state of the battery, all of that. And then your batteries are going to be between $11 and $20. Your motors for Michel 2s, yes, they're only $3 a piece, so $6 for a pair. But your Krakens, your Fang revamps, those ones which are the higher torque, which you would need for a higher crush motor, you're looking at $14 a pair. Or $15 a pair, actually. Then you're looking at your OFP cages, which are the cheapest cages you're going to be able to find because they're 3D printed, but they are licensed. Or actually, I don't know that they are licensed to sell, but even Out of Darts is selling them for $12, cover, time and materials. So there's more money. And then you're looking at your flywheels, which good flywheels will run you between $12 and $18 a pair. So to really do it correctly, you're looking at $100 investment for your first blaster, above and beyond the price of the blaster itself. Now, some of that, like the charger, once you have it, and the tools, once you have them, you get to continue to use them. But you're still shelling out quite a bit of money in cages and motors and flywheels. And in some cases, not for all that much better performance. Yeah, you can easily get them up to $150, $180, probably even $200 if you put, or 200 FPS if you put that money into it. But remember, we were getting 100 FPS, which is almost double the performance, simply by using 3 batteries. So I understand why people do it, but I will continue to encourage you to take the plunge. It is worth it. The performance you will get will, in the long run, be far better, because Lipos have the capacity for you to be able to fire full auto, to be able to squeeze the trigger as fast as you want and not lose FPS with every round. While they are also potentially dangerous if misused, if you don't do your wiring properly and you end up with a short, a catastrophic Lipo, short circuit can be very bad. So we are going to make sure that we cover how to not do that. But the performance will be infinitely better. I resisted the urge for a long time, and for me it was the money as well. And then once I finally had the means to be able to perform, to switch to Lipo, I would never go back. Just never. I just wouldn't. It's so much better. Anyway, enough preaching about safety. Let's talk about the upgrades itself. So we are going to fully rewire this on a 43mm crush cage with Michelle 2 motors. And we are going to use the Out of Darts wheels, because the Out of Darts wheels are incredibly light. And since these are the less torquey option, they need lighter wheels so they can spin up faster. The heavier high torque motors, like the Krakens and the Fang revamps, you can use much heavier motors like the Bulldogs or the Insanto? The ones with the spiral. Because they have the torque to get those going. And the advantage is, because they are heavier wheels, they have the inertia to keep going between shots. You really don't have the drop in between rounds, because they have the inertia or the mass to overcome the inertia of the darts. So, but for the lighter one, because the Michelle 2s are so much cheaper, we're going to start with those on the Out of Darts wheels and in the low crush cage. And we're going to see what kind of performance we get out of that on a 2S Lipo. Then we're going to do the whole thing again, but for Krakens with Bulldog wheels in a high crush cage, and see what kind of a performance increase that gives us, and if we feel it's worth it. So, let's do some soldering. I should have turned the soldering iron on at the beginning of this, so that I could simply get into this, but I didn't. So I'm turning it on now, and besides, I need to moisten my sponge. Okay. So the first thing I have done is I've cut this panel out of the bottom of the battery door, which should give us a little bit more room. This particular battery, I can almost get in here just sideways without the battery tray in it, but I don't know if I'd be able to do that once it's all screwed together. And it definitely probably wouldn't fit anything any larger than this, which the 3S that I want to use is. So instead, I am going to sacrifice this screw post and Dremel down these tabs so that I can fit the battery in sideways right there, as that will easily fit and still have plenty of room to get the cable in, and doesn't get anywhere near conflicting with the flywheel. So, out comes the Dremel. Alright, we now have gobs of room for Lipo. I could fit a huge Lipo in here now. Which would be lovely. Probably even get a bigger one. If I had a narrow one, I could just slide up in there. Anyway, fabulous. Now we can start the wiring. So, like I said, we're going to start with a 43 crush cage with Michelle 2 motors. Alright, so I'm seating the motors into their flywheel cages. The red dots are opposite of each other. And I'm going to screw them in using motor mount screws, though I am not going to use any Loctite, which is normally a very good idea, thread locker, to keep these screws from coming back out, as I have had that happen. In my Strifle Mark II, the motor mount screws came loose and the thing sounded absolutely horrific. It sounded like it was trying to tear itself apart, which was alarming and probably damaging to the flywheels and the motors. But these aren't going to be in here very long. I don't know which ones will be the ones that end up staying in, so I'm just going to screw them in. They shouldn't wander loose because they're going into 3D printed cages, which in and of itself, the fact that the screw hole is very small and tight will inherently hold them in place, certainly long enough for me to complete my tests. The magnets in these Kraken motors are pulling my screws around. That's how powerful they are. Okay, now we need to determine which way they're spinning. So, we're going to put the flywheels on, and we're going to hook up a AA, or a 9 volt, and see which way they spin. We want it to spin in from there. So, the side that is closer to the input is the negative. See if it's the same on this one. But same thing. Negatives on the inside. So, we're going to get these both soldered up. Alright, I'm wiring up the switch now. And the way I'm going to be wiring it is we're going to be going from the battery to the normally open. It'll be marked NO on your switch. And then from COM to the flywheels. And the reason I do that is in the event you should at some point, or if you just happen to want to from the get-go, add motor braking to your rev switch, all you have to do is wire negative from the battery to the normally closed on your switch. Then what comes out of COM and goes to the flywheels will be determined by the position of the switch. If you pull the switch, it'll connect positive up and your flywheels will spin. When you let go of it, it connects negative through. You then have negative going to both sides of your flywheel assembly, and it will halt the motors. So, I don't do motor braking because, like I said, it's harder on your battery as well as on your motors. But for those of you that really like it because it's so much quieter, that is how you would do that. Now, because we're using a heavier wire, it may be necessary in several places to Dremel out larger wire cable channels just so that everything stays out of the way of everything it needs to stay out of the way of. Alright, I've got the switch wired up. I'm now going to hot glue it in place. Never let anybody tell you that hot glue is not vital to Nerf modding. Alright, moment of truth. Did I wire it correctly? I did. Okay. We're gonna button it up enough to throw a few darts through it. Alright, let's get some numbers. Okay, well, that has gotten us to the 120, 125 range, which is about what I expected. It does have a longer barrel than a Strife, which is probably causing some drag. You might consider doing something about that. My auto Strifes on Michelle 2s get closer to 140. I'm not entirely sure what crush or wheels, what cage or wheels I have in my auto Strifes. But with the right cage and wheel combination, you can get at least 140 out of Michelle 2 motors. Which is thoroughly acceptable for a 2S, I feel. Now, we're just gonna quickly swap it over to the High Crush Krakens and put a 3S in it. And see how much of a difference that makes. Let's see how well it flingeth the foam. Ah, right then. With regular darts, it was getting 145. With some random darts from a bag that were picked up after a war, I was getting upwards of 150. So, yes, that is neat. And thoroughly, in my opinion, acceptable. Whether you feel it's worth it is up to you, because well, actually these flywheels I think are a little bit cheaper, but the motors are a little bit more expensive. But the price difference between the Michelle 2s and the out of darts motors and these motors and these wheels are really about the same. The wheels are more expensive, the motors are less expensive, or the wheels are less expensive and the motors are more expensive. Battery's going to be a little bit more expensive. 3S are generally a little more expensive than 2S. And, you know, it hits harder. Depending on your game, it might be now hitting too hard. Really kind of is up to you. There's still some tuning and some tweaking that I would probably do to this to get it a little more reliable. And there are some cosmetic stuff that I definitely want to do. There's a 3D printed upper rail that I will probably go with, because I'm not a huge fan of this carry handle design. There's one that I think makes it into a full carry handle, and there's an extended mag release, definitely getting that. Flared mag well, definitely printing that. Don't know what stock I would use. I would be tempted to use the Modulus stock just because it's the Modulus stock and print that adapter there, but that's really not quite the top end of this, and I'm not going to go to the top end because I have no use of a blaster that's modded to that extent, and I really like this at the level that it's at. So I'm going to take it open and talk about the last option and show how it would work, and I'll go over how I routed the wires just to go over that as well. The final option, and it exists on Thingiverse, and that is dual flywheel cages. This is kind of what the Dominator is built after, as far as the size of the Dominator and the fact that it has an easy area right here to put that second set of flywheels. And there are dual cages on Thingiverse that you can just print out. You'd obviously have to do a lot of dremeling, and the mounting would be a little bit more complicated. But you have all of that room. The same is true for the Demolisher. I believe it uses the same cage as the Demolisher, and the Demolisher also has that much larger front end that easily accommodates a second set of flywheels. So if you wanted to go to the extreme, you could do that. I would argue that the performance increase that you're going to get is probably not going to be worth the added complexity. The more complex a blaster is, the more likely it is to fail. With 4 motors instead of 2 motors, you're twice as likely to have a motor fail, and your blaster will no longer work. So keep that in mind. The more complicated your blaster is, the more likely it is to have a catastrophic failure. Likewise, having redundant systems makes it less likely. So If you have enough room for 2 batteries and you actually decide to run with 2 full batteries, because you could easily get 2 of these 2S's in here side by side and be easily able to either have a switch that flips between them, or just open up the cage and switch between them, and then you have redundancy. You've redundant power source, which is handy. Whereas adding additional stuff can make it more complicated. Same way if you make it full auto, yes, that gives you the added advantage of fully automatic fire, but you have yet another motor that can fail and gears that can slip and more issues that can go wrong. But that's the trade-off you get. Like I said, I don't know of any drop-in full auto kits, but it's similar enough to the Strife that you should be able to modify a Strife full auto kit to get in here. I'm absolutely certain I've heard of people who have done that. Let's take a look at the wiring. As I said, it is a Strife wiring. You've got a positive that goes here under the upper flywheel through this wire channel, which, because I'm using thicker wire, they don't quite fit in. Anyway, it then comes around underneath here. There's a very nice cable channel right there that even with these bigger wires, thicker wires, can be pushed into. And then it runs back here behind the trigger. I looped it behind this light gray peg to get it out of the way of the trigger, and it does still impact it enough. Not enough to keep it from firing. And then I had to cut out this little tab just with an X-Acto knife, widen it in order to get the wires behind, but they fit nicely. And the 10 amp switch that I put in there works. It fits. If you really wanted to go to a full Omron, I'm pretty sure you could fit one in there. You might end up losing this screw post, but I'm willing to bet you could probably finagle it in there if you really, really wanted to. The other option, if you like dual stage triggers, would be to put the switch up here in front of the trigger so that a partial trigger pull releases the switch, and that way you would have it wired to the normally closed instead of the normally open. And so pulling the trigger would release the switch, which would make the flywheels go. I've seen that done in the Swordfish and the Dominator as another option, and I think one of the Select Fire kits has mountings for that as well. So a partial trigger pull revs and then full trigger pull fires. If you wanted to do it that way, that is an option. I'm going to go check on some 3D printed parts and possibly print some additional parts. I really want that flared magwell and that extended mag release. I have the files, I just need to go get them printing. So, I'm going to pause here and go deal with that. Alright, well, I discovered one thing while I was buttoning the blaster back up. Or at least getting it buttoned up enough so that I can take the end of the video thumbnail. The way I dremeled out the wiring line here above the magwell, I actually ended up that's part of the guide for the jam door. So I had to move some things around. The wires should be going here just under the pusher rather than up and over, assuming you want the jam door, which I do because it cuts down on noise. So there's that. This will still then fit over the top and will actually, I think, hold it in place a little better now than it was before. We got that. I have added an extended magazine release lever, though it's almost comically extended, and I'm currently printing a slightly shortened version that I think will actually be a little bit more secure. The hole for the screw post is actually a little bit too big and is a little bit loose as a result, so I'm going to bring the whole thing up a little bit tighter and should make it not quite so long, and hopefully we'll bring it in. This was designed by Nerf 3D on Thingiverse, so the flared magwell is also still printing. I should have started that hours ago when I started this whole project. It'd be done by now, but I didn't. So, yeah. I am buttoning it up just enough so I can take the picture. I'm then going to pretty much take it right back apart again to start painting and doing some additional cosmetic work, because I really like how this one's coming together. One last thing about batteries. If you don't wire an external volt meter up to your blaster. At the very least, get one of these Lipo battery alarms. In this one, there is just oodles of space that you can put this in here because of how large that battery tray is. And it'll make a very large amount of noise to inform you that your Lipo is getting low, which is just always a good idea because you never want to over drain your Lipos or they won't recharge and then you have to buy new ones. So keep that in mind. Anyway, there you have it. There's my take on what can be done with the Modulus ECS 10. So there will be a survey for the next episode. It will be Springers again. I'm going to go with ones that I, again, know that I have and that I'm pretty sure I have the parts for. And then the episode after that will be Flywheels again. I'll probably add another one and relist the ones that I had before. I should have all the stuff to do a whole slew of the Hurricane, all the way from stock, the worker Hurricane, from stock all the way up to dual cage. So keep that in mind when you're voting for the next Flywheel one, because I'm going to be doing that anyway. You might as well vote for it. Anyway, there you have it. Hope this was helpful. Thank you guys for watching.